in terms of engaging volunteers and recruiting volunteers, there are usually three aspects that we look at when we look at when people want to volunteer, and that's to do with willingness, capability, and availability. In effect, availability is the one that is most easily overcome if people are willing to volunteer and if they feel like they have the skills and the abilities to fulfill those roles. And I think that's where a matching service such as FreddyMatch comes in, which is that you have roles, a variety of roles that are available for people with a variety of different skills, and they can actually look at those skills to see and identify which of those roles they are most willing to be part of. And that's where events volunteering also comes in. It gives people a taste of what volunteering is like. It gives people a feeling of accomplishment for perhaps a community that they are involved with or they are concerned with. And with that taste, that then gives them the willingness to want to volunteer for the community. So putting all three of those factors, being able to find a role that they can fulfill, wanting to contribute to a community, plus carving time out for volunteering, I think that's what might be a more successful model of volunteering, particularly for long-term volunteering. So from an organization's perspective, of course you want these volunteers to come back, because then that means that these returning volunteers can train newer volunteers and also continue in their roles. So how would you get them to come back? Well, firstly, of course, recognize what it is that they're doing that is benefiting your organizations and the beneficiaries of your organization. Aside from that, it might be good to also facilitate relationships between volunteers outside of these events. So for example, organizing afternoon teas or organizing social events for your volunteers outside of their volunteer role may strengthen their identity as a group.
How can organisations make their volunteers more committed? And yes, that is the million-dollar question. And I think it does come back to the diagram I showed you before. So setting very clear expectations and very realistic expectations for volunteers. Then delivering on that experience for volunteers. So if you have promised them a certain reward or there's an expectation in place, then that must be delivered upon. Of course, this is a model for best practice management. There will always be individual features that volunteers are looking for. Having as much information about your volunteers as possible is also a good way of looking to tailor opportunities to volunteers. But realistically for event organisations, depending on the size and the scope of the organisation, they will need to get a certain number of volunteers involved, and there may not always be the opportunity to tailor opportunities to each individual volunteer. But certainly a generic strategy of setting realistic expectations, delivering upon those expectations and rewarding volunteers is a good strategy for attempting to get the best out of your volunteers and give them a good experience. What we are seeing is that organisations are responding to this challenge and trying to put in place platforms to encourage people to volunteer, and doing so very cleverly using technology. So matching as much as possible potential volunteers' interests to then opportunities in volunteer involving organisations. So platforms such as FreddyMatch, which are very much about tailoring as much as possible the opportunities for volunteering, whether it be in an event or any other volunteering organisation. But that detail and that level of information about prospective volunteers can only mean that the tailoring of the opportunity relative to their interests, their opportunities, their expectations will hopefully then translate to a better volunteering experience.